Good morning, everyone, and welcome to all who have registered to attend our Middle East Peace Now September Forum. I'm Janet Tolan, President of Middle East Peace Now. We'd like to thank our sponsors to begin for this event: Northfielders for Justice in Palestine, Israel, Women Against Military Madness, and of course, the Minnesota BDS movement. We appreciate these organizations and others in their support of MEPN monthly forums. Please consider supporting them by attending their events as well. And before I introduce our speakers, Tom will share a few housekeeping items about the webinar. First, all participants will be muted for the duration of the event. Submit questions using the Q&A feature of Zoom, and we'll put them in the queue. Please use the chat feature for any administrative or help questions, and we'll do our best to assist you. If you can try to put your questions in the Q&A and not in the chat, I'll be sure not to miss them, okay? I'll check the chat, but do your best to put them in the Q&A, please. Please be respectful in the chat and in the Q&A. We reserve the right to remove anyone who is causing harm. If Zoom is not working for you, email MEPN@mepn.org and we'll do our best to help. And now to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. Mohammed Mayaleh is a Palestinian-American attorney and activist in the Twin Cities who has lived in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. His last visit to Palestine was in September of 2024, so just a year ago. Mohammed has a BA in political science and philosophy from Minnesota State University, Mankato, and a JD and MBA from the University of St. Thomas. Angel Dobrow joined the Minnesota BDS Community in early 2024 to engage with statewide campaigns to end the Israeli occupation of Palestine. She's a key organizer with the Duluth, Minnesota-based Palestine Solidarity Working Group and an active member of the Twin Ports Democratic Socialists of America chapter. Together, Angel and Mohammed have worked tirelessly with the BDS community to raise awareness of the unfairness and illegality of the anti-BDS law that was passed here in Minnesota. Welcome both of you to the Middle East Peace Now Forum. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, everyone. Presentation up? Right? Okay, great. Thank you all. So the Minnesota BDS group has been for some time working on getting the Minnesota anti-BDS statutes repealed. And we're finally at a point where we've had two bills introduced. Well, we've had one bill, one in the House and one in the Senate. And right now we're just trying to rally as much support for these two bills as we can. And we're hoping that by with this presentation to give you some insights on why we're doing this and what we are looking for and how you can be involved. So to that extent, what we plan on presenting to you today, we'll start off with some of the brief history about boycotts, and what a boycott is, not what a boycott is, but about more so the statutes and legality around boycotts. We'll talk about Minnesota's anti-boycott law, and then we're going to talk to you about protecting boycotts, and how Minnesota's anti-boycott law and how repealing that will in fact protect a right to boycott. So like I said, I'm not going to dive too deep into certain things. And so we were told that you are a very informed audience, which is great. So we are going to make some assumptions. The first is, you know what a boycott is. So you know that not purchasing something, not engaging in something for a political reason, you know what we're talking about when we talk about a boycott. Second is that you know about the BDS movement, the boycott, divest, and sanctions movement, originating from Palestinian civil society and now gaining a lot of momentum around the world, and what their aims are, and what their objectives are as well. And then you know about boycotts as they relate to Israel. Both whether it's through the BDS or whether it's through another organization or grassroots or somebody just saying, you know what, I don't want to do anything with Israel because of what they're doing. So you're aware of kind of those decisions. And then similarly, you're aware of legislatures, APAC, other politicians who are involved in making sure that this doesn't happen. So those are kind of the assumptions that we'll have about you as the audience. So if I don't get into a lot of that stuff, that's why. We'll start with the right to boycott. Let me preface this by saying I'm not a constitutional law expert or attorney, or a boycott attorney or boycott law or anything like that. I mainly do felony prosecution, so I'm kind of away from that area. As my wife, who is also an attorney, likes to remind me, I'm not even the best attorney in my own house. But what we're going to do here is just kind of give you a little bit of some legal background on the so-called right to boycott and where it started and where we're at right now. So typically, if you were to go out and ask somebody, do you have a right to boycott? It seems like the natural answer would be yes. There's something about it where you're like, well, this is kind of related to speech. I'm choosing not to do something for a certain reason. I'm using my money, putting my money where my mouth is. Nothing's more American than that. And it seems to be that that is something that's protected by the First Amendment. And thankfully, that kind of is where we are at right now, in the legal field. So nonviolent boycotts are in fact protected First Amendment activity. And that came from the Supreme Court. The case where that came from is the NAACP versus Claiborne Hardware. In that case, the NAACP organized a bunch of boycotts, and this was in Mississippi. But a bunch of boycotts for businesses that were failing to abide by some of the civil rights movement, what they were able to achieve. Claiborne and a bunch of other businesses turned around and said, hey, we're suing you guys for all of our lost damages. NAACP appealed, went up all the way to the Supreme Court. So, and the Supreme Court held that, yes, nonviolent boycotts are in fact protected First Amendment activity. Now, although it's not, for those of you who can recite the First Amendment, great job. But the First Amendment doesn't explicitly mention boycotts. So where did the Supreme Court find the right to boycott? Well, they said it's a mixture of the right to speech, assembly, and petition, which are all three rights that are explicitly protected by the First Amendment. So the court said, if you take all these together, that's what a boycott is. And if these three rights are protected, then boycott is protected. So the issue with it is that we've seen how rights that are not explicit, but rather assumed from surrounding areas are treated. Basically, you know, it's the law until it's not. It's a right until it's not. A prime example of that would be the recent overturning of Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade was the law of the land. It was similar. The courts found the right in the penumbrums, you know, in between the lines of the Constitution and said it's there. And then a new court said, no, it's not. So there are some concerns around if the right to boycott, if this is how it was found, is it going to be there for future generations? Now, what about in Minnesota? Well, Minnesota doesn't explicitly protect the right to free speech. Rather, Minnesota has the liberty of the press, and that's a Minnesota constitutionally protected amendment. So in that, you see that all persons may freely speak. Now, you can make the leap and say, okay, this is free speech is, that's where boycott is. The Supreme Court said in NAACP versus Claiborne, it was more so that it was speech, assembly, and petition. So we don't have all three of those in the Minnesota Constitution. So will the Minnesota Constitution protect the right to boycott? We don't know. And it would take a legal challenge to kind of figure that out, which we'll get into. So let's talk about anti-boycott laws. I originally thought that it was just the BDS, that it was just anti-BDS. But when you look into it, it turns out there are a lot of areas that state legislatures are making sure to ensure that we, the people, cannot boycott. These are some of the areas in which state legislatures have either introduced bills, passed bills, or there's an executive order regarding what you can and cannot do with relation to boycotting these areas. So this is very important, especially with the campaign that we are going to be running and what we're doing, because being pro-Palestinian, it's not a completely liberal thing. It's not conservative thing. You have a ton of liberals and Democrats who are very liberal, very progressive, but still say, we don't support the right to, or we don't agree with boycotting Israel. So, and on the conservative side, it's kind of the same thing. So why this is important to note that there are other areas where anti-boycott laws are being placed is because once you get one anti-boycott law on the books, that law is then used as a template for every other area. You basically just use the same law that's on the books. You cross out whatever issue area you're trying to protect, and you put in the one that you want. And so repealing Minnesota's anti-boycott law is not just about being pro-Palestinian, but really it's about protecting a lot of other things. And that's very important with how we pitch this campaign. And it really crosses into both ideologies because, right now we kind of have a split legislature here in Minnesota. I know of, or I've heard of at least two different bills that are being contemplated. The first one is, um, I know that on the right, there have been discussions and possibly even a bill drafted where it says you cannot engage in boycotting any companies that are involved in the mineral mining or that are associated with that in the boundary waters. And all they have to do is use the anti-BDS statute and just take those words out, plug in what they want, and there you go. It's also important to note, and I know this might not be the right crowd for it, but I'm just going to say it because this can garner support. This campaign can garner support from both sides because on the left, there are discussions about enacting a law that says you cannot boycott businesses that are engaged in DEI. Again, I don't want to get into it with this, and some of you may agree with that, some of you may disagree with that. But let's say you're talking to your conservative uncle who's like, I don't give a shit about any of that. And you say, well, once the legislature goes deep blue, they might pass a law that says you can't boycott a business engaged in DEI. And your uncle is going to be like, all right, we need to do something. So really we just bring this up to kind of make sure that, or to give you guys some more speaking points when you are talking about this. Anti-boycott laws as they relate to Israel. The first one popped up in 2015, which is also when all of these anti-boycott laws started appearing. The first states to pass the anti-boycott, the anti-BDS law was Illinois. And then soon after they just started rolling out. And I believe it's about 38 states now have either a law on the books or an executive order that is anti-BDS. They range. Some states have it where it goes so far to say as a individual cannot boycott Israel. Other states say businesses cannot boycott Israel. So it kind of, there's a huge spectrum of where it goes and how it's enforced. What about Minnesota's anti-BDS law? It was introduced in 2017. Representative Ron Kresha, who's still in office, introduced it into the House. It had 30, I believe it had 35 co-authors, which is the maximum amount of co-authors you can have. So everybody was jumping on this. In the Senate, you had Warren Limmer, who's still in office, who introduced it in the Senate. It was introduced early 2017, passed around the summer of 2017. It's basically walked right through. There wasn't much opposition in either house. And we were able to get some insight on that. We were able to, I know that I personally was at a meeting with a representative who kind of explained to us the atmosphere and the thought process when this bill was introduced. That representative is the late Melissa Hortman. She took the time to kind of talk to us about this, and we were able to get some information. At the time that the bills were introduced, the Democrats saw it as a way for the GOP or for the Republicans to split the Democratic Party. They said, we're going to put this bill out there. It's going to cause controversy. We're united on it. The Dems are going to be split. It's going to start an issue. It's going to slow everything down. It's going to cause chaos in the House. Both sides do this. So it's not just Republicans who do these types of things. Both Republicans and Democrats will introduce bills to try to split the other side or to try to get some kind of showdown. Democrats saw the bill and they said, this isn't the hill that we want to die on. We know what they're doing. Let's not let them do it. Let's just let it go through. Interestingly, Melissa told us that the Democrats, at least, when they saw this, they didn't see it as an issue because they believed it was so plainly on its face unconstitutional that as soon as it walks out of the governor's office, it's going to go into court and get struck down. So there was no concern. They were like, this is so obviously unconstitutional. It's going to get struck down right away. So let's just pass it and move on with our day. That's not what happened. Here we are, 8 years later, and it is still there. So the Minnesota bill originally was prohibitive against businesses, and I believe it was any business that's going to get a state contract. The initial amount was $1,000. Later, it was amended to contracts of $50,000 or more would need to sign a pledge or a certification that they are not going to engage in the boycott of Israel or any entities that are kind of related to that. So this is kind of similar to the laws that were passed in other states. Again, these laws are all templates. You just take it and pass it around. And you can see from reading the Minnesota law, all you would need to do is just cross out Israel and put in big oil, and you got yourself a very dangerous law on the books. All right, so with that said, we, at least in Minnesota BDS, and with the legislature that we've been able to speak with, have looked at, well, how do we protect the right to boycott? And there's basically two ways, either going through the courts, which basically means going into the court and saying, hey, this law violates a protected right. So kind of what was done in NAACP versus Claiborne, where they went in and they said this lower court's decision violates our First Amendment right. Going through the courts, you need some sort of plaintiff. You need somebody who has standing. So you need somebody that's actually been harmed by this. And then it's unclear where it would result. So, and then legislature, there are two different avenues. You can go down passing a bill or amending the Constitution. So we'll talk about that later. But for now, we'll talk about courts. BDS laws, anti-BDS laws have been through the courts. They have faced legal challenges. One of the most well-known ones is what happened in Arkansas. Arkansas passed a law that required anybody doing business with the state to certify that they're not going to boycott Israel. One of the plaintiffs in this case was the Arkansas newspaper, a newspaper in Arkansas. They got this, and they weren't necessarily pro-Palestinian, but they more so were on this just doesn't seem right. This is anti-speech, anti-press. We're not going to sign this. So it was more a principled stand. The initial court, and because in Arkansas it was the grounds on which they were challenging it was the First Amendment, the federal Constitution. It went through the federal courts. It went up all the way to the Eighth Circuit. Unlike the court and Supreme Court in NAACP versus Claiborne, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals decided to say, this isn't really a boycott. This law doesn't limit boycotts. Rather, it's more so around non-expressive conduct. So they, for whatever reason, found a way to distinguish between expressive conduct and non-expressive commercial conduct. And because they were able to, they found that, and that's kind of the grounds that they use to say, you know what, this Arkansas law, it's good law, it could stay in place. So, and again, it was then appealed to the Supreme Court. There were a ton of briefs that were filed because almost every First Amendment expert in the country was like, you got it wrong. So let's clarify that. Went up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court refused to hear it. So this is now the law of the land for the Eighth Circuit, which unfortunately is where Minnesota is. So if we were in Minnesota to try to take it up on the through the federal courts, this right here is the law that would govern that. So it just wouldn't end. We don't have the law there, and then the Supreme Court refusing to certify it kind of says that, yep, this is what you guys get. So the other case, Texas has had a few. Texas also passed a similar law, which saying if you're going to enter into a contract with the government, you need to certify that you are not going to boycott Israel. There were a few cases that were taken through the courts. The most notable one, or I guess for this purposes, was A&R Engineering. In that case, A&R Engineering was a sole proprietor business owned by a Palestinian, and he got a contract with the city of Houston. And when he got the contract, he saw this language that said, you must certify that you are not going to boycott Israel. He refused to sign it, and then he sued, saying it was, violation of his First Amendment. The way that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals got around it was kind of on a technicality, because in the time that it went from the district court up to the Court of Appeals, the Texas legislature quickly amended their anti-BDS law to exclude sole proprietors. So by the time it got to the Fifth Circuit, they were like, hey, A&R Engineering, this no longer applies to you, so we're not going to hear it. And Texas did that a couple times where whenever it was challenged in the court, they just quickly amended it in order to leave it in place. The court did note that this law doesn't really seem to be enforceable, or at least the plaintiffs who came haven't shown us how the Texas Attorney General is authorized to enforce this law. So then again, the Fifth Circuit, they were able to just kind of get around it on technicalities and never actually address the issue. So then we get into why, at least from Minnesota BDS's perspective, why we kind of chose not to go down the courts route, because of all that uncertainty, because of the Eighth Circuit law that's on the books, and because there's no constitutional rights in the Minnesota Constitution that protects the right to boycott. So then we look at the legislative route, and with that, you kind of get two different avenues. You can either pass a law that repeals it, or you could pass a constitutional amendment basically saying that the right to boycott is a constitutionally protected right. When we were looking at these options, even some of our strongest supporters in the legislature said a constitutional amendment is basically a no-go. It would be extremely difficult. It would take a ton of resources. It's just a lot that even our BDS's strongest supporters in the legislature just didn't have the appetite for at this time. And that's kind of a response that we got from a lot of the different politicians that we were trying to work with. For example, one other avenue we explored was asking Attorney General Keith Ellison to issue an advisory opinion on this law. Ellison said, if you can find a single representative or a single representative or senator in the House or senator in the Minnesota legislature that can send me a letter asking me to issue an advisory opinion, I will issue a favorable, or we believed that he would issue a favorable advisory opinion on this law. Problem with that was we couldn't find any lawmakers who were willing to make that request. We did find a few, but then we found out that within the Democratic Party, they said it's essentially the vibe was that Ellison is looking at future political career, and we don't want him issuing that opinion because it would be bad for the Democrats. So even if there were lawmakers that were willing to ask Ellison to issue that opinion, they were kind of looking at it as more of a long-term strategy of we need Ellison to stay electable, so we're not going to ask him to do it. Very unfortunate, but hey. The next option after the constitutional amendment is for a repeal. And we found lawmakers that were willing to work with us on that, who were willing to introduce these bills. And that's where we are. And so you can kind of see really that how important this repeal campaign is, and why we are here and why we need the support that we do and why we need to act now. And with that, I will turn it over to Angel.
Hi, everyone. So last spring of 2025, the JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, Twin Cities chapter, organized what's called a Day on the Hill. And it's when an organization, brings representatives and you have talking points and you talk to legislators and try and bring attention to a specific issue or problem that you want them to look at. And Senator Sandy Pappas had introduced in the previous legislative session into the Senate a bill calling for the repeal of the anti-boycott law. But we couldn't find, in this previous session, we could not find anybody in the House of Representatives, because you need a legislator from both houses to introduce a companion bill. right after this JVP event last spring, it's almost like a dam broke. Within weeks or a month, we had, let's go to the next slide. Thanks. Actually, the next one. So within a very short time, Christy Purcell of Northfield, Minnesota, did introduce a companion bill to Sandy Papas's bill. So now we have repeal bills in both the Senate and in the House. In the Senate, Senator Marty also signed on as a co-author. And in the House, I think it's 13, 14 legislators signed on as co-sponsors. So when I say like a dam broke, it's, all of a sudden we're getting traction. And they were able to have the first reading of each of these bills, and they have now been moved to the next step in the process, which is each of them are moved to a committee for a hearing. Let's go to the next one, which I think is, so these are the co-sponsors in the House. Kind of a no-brainer. They're all DFLers. All right, so now that there is movement on these, on the anti-boycott repeal bills, the legislators have done their part for now. They wrote the bills, they had the hearings, and they moved them, or the first readings, and they moved them into the appropriate committees. So the Minnesota BDS community and a lot of our supporters spent most of this summer figuring out how to continue to exert pressure on the legislators. We don't want these repeal bills to languish and die. We don't want them to die in committees. We don't want them to die at hearings. We want them to get passed, discussed, and passed. And so we have developed a campaign organizing the citizens of Minnesota to develop relationships with, and talk with their legislators to urge a yes vote on the repeal. Our campaign is extremely ambitious, and it is going to take the help of a lot of people around the state. Our intention is to, by the end of this year, to have spoken to every single elected official, either a senator or the representative in the state of Minnesota. And we want to know, are they going to vote yes on this repeal bill? Are they going to vote no? Are they going to vote maybe? Well, they won't vote maybe, but where they stand on it. And it's possible that our legislators, a lot of ideas and paperwork and rules come across their desk every legislative session. And so it's possible that we're going to run into elected officials that don't even know what we're talking about. So next. So in this, as part of this campaign, we have divided the state into geographic areas. I think we have about 9 of them. So we have, the Northwest and the Northeast, and in the middle, central Minnesota. So we divided up all of the districts in Minnesota to be able to record, and I'll show you that in a minute, be able to record who the representative is, how they voted on this bill in 2017 or not, because they might not have been elected, who their legislative aide is, and also what their kind of area of interest is. So we're trying to figure out how to appeal to all the elected officials to get a yes vote. Now, the arguments, as Mohammed has pointed out, the arguments will be different depending on the area of the state, depending on who we gather in, help in this, support for this campaign. It's super important that we have a constituent in every legislative district. And that is because many elected officials won't talk to people who aren't their constituents. And that's okay. They get to do that and manage their time, but it becomes incumbent upon us to be sure that we have a representative, we have a constituent in every district that can guide their senator and or representative to a yes vote. We've started contacting organizations. There's that original 30 organizations at the JVP, Day on the Hill, that signed on the coalition statement urging the Senate and the House of Representatives to repeal this anti-boycott law. We're starting with them. We're also reaching out to faith organizations and other activist organizations that were not talked to in this previous round. We're also going to be reaching out to people and organizations that we don't have a lot in common with. And that's where we will be providing talking points to everybody who signs up. But people need to know that sometimes the argument to be made will be free speech. That's probably the main argument, but sometimes it will be completely focused on free speech. Palestine and Israel may or may not even come up or be a part of the discussion. On the other hand, there will be many organizations and individuals who feel very strongly about the ongoing genocide in Palestine. And so their avenue into arguing for a yes vote will be, to support the Palestinian people. Next. So our tentative plan is we are using the months of September and October to find citizen lobbyists. And those are the constituents. And those we will find them through reaching out to organizations and asking for support and asking them to ask their members to participate in this citizen lobby effort. And I just want to point out that this is a huge learning opportunity for so many constituents. Like we can kind of look around a room very often where we do our organizing and we know about laws and we know about pressuring elected officials and we know about, we're following the news in the Middle East, but we can't assume that everybody is in that situation. So this may be for some people the first time they've talked to, their elected official. And so we want to reassure everybody that they'll be supported. We'll host Zoom meetings, training sessions, provide printed materials. We'll tell you who your elected officials are if you give us, your address and can't figure that out. And we'll also be supportive along the way about, my elected official says this. And so we'll be able to kind of help people work through how to proceed. We are hoping to have by the end of the year, a 75% of the senators and representatives, 75% will vote yes on these repeal bills. Let's go to the next page. All right, so let's go to the next one. I'm sorry, covered that. Okay, so this is how we are going to organize ourselves as people, the regular public engages with this project. So this slide right here, it shows, you can see in the upper left-hand corner, Southeast Minnesota. So we list the senators, their party, how they voted. We have the representatives, the same thing. Mohammed, next page. And then we have behind that, for each elected representative, we have their legislative aid. And some of these are, this column is blank because in some situations aides haven't been assigned yet. But we have we'll have the legislative name, their phone number, and what happened with the discussion. Now, legislative aides, I want to point out, are people, of course, will be reaching out to their elected officials, but a key, not going to say the key because they don't vote, but a key participant in this process will be the elected officials' legislative aide. These are gatekeepers. They decide what gets kind of passed through, or they prioritize what gets passed through to the elected official. They hold the calendars. And so that will be actually, for a lot of people, actually their first contact in this process is with their elected officials' legislative aid. And I do want to sing to the praises of legislative aides for 1 second. We are working with one from my area, and they are an incredible fount of information because they're sitting there in the middle of all the legislative action. And so also they want to be probably in general helpful. They want to be of service. That's why they took this job. And so we'll be discussing how to cultivate relationships with the legislative aides. And then we will be, just to wrap up on this, we will be recording the contacts that people make with their aides. We will be holding, the Minnesota BDS Community campaign team will be tallying that vote count, which, we're organizing before the legislation, they meet again in February. Next. So this is just to reiterate, this is actually a little bit out of date, this slide, because that last sentence says it gives us time to quietly build our campaign. We are in the middle of this now. Our thinking had been over the summer to carefully build up the infrastructure, and we've done a very good job on that. We are assembling packets to be distributed to several sectors of the population. These are organizational sectors. We're reaching out to the 30 organizations that signed the JVP coalition statement, ally organizations. So those people who didn't sign but probably will help with this effort, and faith communities, and also people that we don't know. We don't know where they stand on this. And each of those packets is crafted, sort of the appeal and the explanation is crafted a little bit differently. And those are probably going to start, I probably will start going out early next week. All right, next. Just a couple, quick sentences on the hearings. And there's 2 slides on this. So when a bill is moving through the legislature, the first thing that's decided is what committees have to consider it and maybe make tweak some of the language. But this is all very, very normal part of the process, and very often the committees will hold public hearings. So that's another thing that we'll be gearing up for in December and January. And a small subset of our campaign group is actually laser focused on the committee chair people. Like who's in charge of scheduling the hearing, setting that up. And so we'll be watching that very, very carefully and participating in hearings. Hopefully, after whatever, February or March. All right, next. So this means that we will be reaching out to people who are participating as citizen lobbyists. We'll be reaching out to people to see if they will also want to come speak at a hearing. And another thing, one of the legislative aides that we're working with has offered to train us on how to be a citizen representative in a hearing. And that will be, I'm really looking forward to that. But we see this as a way to broaden people's participation in the legislative process, in the democratic process. It's very easy to kind of open up the newspaper and then just throw your hands up or give up. We want to energize a grassroots effort to speak our minds, stand up for what we think is important, and have a way for people to engage in that process. Next. All right, this is the last slide, and then we'll start taking questions. I see a lot of them coming through on the chat. This is, as I said, it's an ambitious effort. The Minnesota BDS Communities campaign team has done extensive work setting up the infrastructure so that when people contact us to say, I would like to participate, we can then hand them their participation papers, whatever we want to call them. So we want to make this as easy, as smooth, as enjoyable as possible for citizen lobbyists to help in this effort to repeal the campaign bill. And we repeal the anti-boycott bills. We feel strongly that we have a very good chance to do this. The tide is turning, public opinion, and the tide is turning in our favor. People are always in an uproar about freedom of speech, yada, yada. So I think that we can carefully and thoughtfully ride this tide to repealing the anti-boycott laws in Minnesota. And I would like to say, separate from the courts, no states that have 38 states have these anti-boycott bills on their books, and nobody has overturned them. And Minnesota can be the first to do that. And so we have an email address listed on this slide. We are encouraging everybody that can to contact us, and we will get you enlisted in the campaign. Thanks.
Angel and Mohammed, thank you. There's so much to say to respond to all of this. I want to say first that MEPN will support the BDS community in any way we can to partner with you. I encourage everyone to follow your Facebook page, Minnesota BDS. That's what it's called. So if you want to go to Facebook, if you are on Facebook, you can follow them and get up-to-date information, I presume. All right, we will go to the Q&A. Excuse me. And we have several. The first one is a long paragraph, so bear with me. And Angel and Mohammed, I know you can, actually, before I do this one, we had a request and I had already thought of it. Angel, could you go back to the slide to show the list of co-sponsors who signed on to co-sponsor the bill? You had mentioned that they happen to all be Democrats. If you could If you could shoot to that slide quickly, and then we'll go with the Q&A.
There.
Okay, I felt the same way. It kind of whizzed by, so we'll just take a moment to examine the list. And if you don't see your representative, and I do not see mine, I'm going to contact them. Okay, I think that'll do it. Everybody will get a copy of this in your MailChimp email in the future. So if you want to take notes, you don't have to on this go around. Okay. All right, we'll go to the Q&A. All right, this is from Richard Dobrow. Your thoughts on this response are received from Representative Esther, and I don't know how to, Agbahe. Quote, we introduced the bill again to repeal the prohibition on BDS. It is HF 3258. Unfortunately, we don't have the numbers to pass it unless there's a great pressure campaign from the public. This clearly addresses what you are aiming to do, Angel. I can feel that shift happening, but not sure how widespread it is. I know that that's unsatisfying, but until more legislators see that this law affects even more than policy toward Israel, such as First Amendment rights, and that it needs to be repealed, we will continue to have a hard time with a small group of members willing to move on this issue. We all see the horrific actions from the Israeli government and know that it must end. Thank you for keeping up your advocacy. I believe that's not a question, it's a statement, and I think you've actually addressed it quite eloquently in your goals of the coming months. So we'll move on. All right, if there isn't a companion bill in both Senate and House, does that mean it cannot advance, or what are the implications? Who wants to respond to that one?
Well, that is correct, but that is not the situation. There is a bill a companion bill in each of the House, and if you go to, I think it's called the Minnesota Reviser, and if you go look up the repeal bill in the House, it'll show the Senate's companion bill. And if you go to the Senate version, it'll show the House's companion bill. So is there confusion about whether that is the situation, or because there are bills in both houses?
I think the question was, what if one of those two bills is not passed? If it passes in one branch but not the other.
I see. Mohammed, you want to?
Yeah, it doesn't advance.
It just
You need it to be through both, and for it to go through committee, and then for it to go to the governor. So if one fails, then the whole bill fails.
So do you start all over with brand new bills?
Well, they'd have to be reintroduced.
Okay. All right. Next question, a quick one. Have you reached out to Catholic Archbishop Hebda?
I don't have an answer for that. And if somebody thinks we should, that would be amazing. And we would love to talk with this person who's making the suggestion to see if an introduction can be made. Okay.
That is Richard. And Richard, why don't you list in the chat your email if you want to be contacted in that regard? Okay. Next question. What has the experience to date been with Republican legislators about the repeal effort, if you know?
We haven't started reaching out yet to elected officials. You know, that's going to be happening this fall. So I'm going to say that we don't know. And I also just want to add that one of the strongest opponents to the work that we're doing is actually in the DFL. So let's not assume, you know what I mean, that we're only going to get opposition from the Republicans. That is why this campaign is being sort of tweaked to reach out to differing interests, right? People who have different life experiences, and we'll be appealing to them on, you know, all of it counts, right? I mean, we all want the genocide in Palestine to end, like, you know, 2 years ago. We all want that. We all want to end the suffering there. But we also all want to be able to boycott if that is, the tactic that we choose. Now, another thing I meant to bring up and I forgot, it might seem at first glance that this bill doesn't, this anti-boycott bill doesn't apply to every individual, and that is true. You are, as Mohammed said, it's businesses that are contracting with the state of Minnesota for an amount greater of $50,000 or greater, and that does not apply to most of us. However, that does not diminish the importance. That number could be changed. The targets could be changed. Big oil, environmental concerns, mining, it's not, this is just an oppressive template to stifle people's free speech and ability to, manifest their personal decision, And so I think that we recognize that we will be, talking with people who may not have any contacts, right? They're never going to get a contract with the state of Minnesota for more than $50,000, but that's kind of it's beside the point. This anti-boycott law, in some way or another, really does affect all of us.
And just going off of that, it's only a short leap for them to start applying it to more people because the State Board of Investments, they can say we cannot not buy Israeli bonds because that would be boycotting Israel and we're spending millions and billions of dollars. So obviously it applies to us. So it's not far from them saying, well, it's first for individual business contracts over 50,000 to saying a police officer, a teacher, or any other state or government employee, well, you have a pension that's with the state or that's funded through the state, and your pension has to be invested in it. And if you want to oppose that, hey, there's a boycott law saying that you can't.
I was going to say the same thing, but not nearly as eloquently. So thank you for that, both of you. Quick note from Sylvia Schwartz. You probably both know Sylvia. She moved from Minnesota to Illinois. Quick note, Minnesota is competing with Illinois to be the first to repeal each anti-BDS law. So there we have it. We have competition and it's friendly. Next question. Given that the U.S. Supreme Court's 1982 decision allows for nonviolent boycott movements, I do not understand why the Eighth Circuit Court's decision stands.
Yeah, and that's you read when it went up to the Supreme Court, the Eighth Circuit, when it was appealed, when you read the briefs, it was unanimous that constitutional scholars were just like, you got it wrong. But the court said, you know what, this isn't, the Eighth Circuit just said, and courts get it wrong all the time. That's, we have a whole history of that happening. So, but if the Supreme Court refuses to hear it, then there's really not much that you can do. And do we want this current Supreme Court to hear it? So there's that consideration as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Next, comes from Lucia. If I work for a company that holds a contract with the state of Minnesota, does the contract also apply to me and affect my right to boycott? Good question.
Yeah, again, I think that we don't know that it's gone there yet in Minnesota. I think other states have pushed that. In Texas, that's, they had the individual teacher have to make that certification. So we're not far from it.
If I can just hop in for 1 second. There's a company named Just Vision made a really excellent film. I don't know if it's two or 3 years old or so. It's called Boycott. And it covers the cases of 3 plaintiffs who were pushing back on this requirement that you have to agree, sign a contract, you have to agree to not boycott. So it's called Boycott, and it's extremely well done. And I'm pretty sure you can like stream it on Netflix or something.
Not only that, but we showed the film, at least a portion of it, before it was aired by the public. We were contacted by the makers of the film, and we have kept contact with them. So, yep, we have a request. Actually, this is from Tom, and it's timely. Angel, could you share your invitation to ask for email addresses and talk about that?
So the bones of this grassroots campaign lays on the ability for us to get in touch and engage with the public. As I have stated, to become citizen lobbyists. I'm not unclear of how far-reaching the audience is I'm talking to right now. But I do know that there is a lot of support in the Twin Cities, and it's not going to be hard to find people to engage with their elected officials. I believe our sense is that that's not going to be as easy in outstate Minnesota. And so a request that we're making to this organization is let us know if you can help by contacting your elected officials. If you can get your cousin who lives 20 miles outside Mankato to help contact their elected official. If your church or synagogue or mosque or faith community wants to be more informed, we can do this presentation again for individual organizations. If your organization wants more information on how to get involved, contact us, let us know that. And the email address is super easy. It's MNBDS, what is it? At gmail.com. No, MN BDS Community. Sorry, at gmail.com. Send us a request as an organization for more information, as an individual for more information, if you have ideas of people or groups that we should be contacting. We want to spread out all over the state. We want to be in every legislative district. We want to be, having people talk to their legislators from everywhere. This is a great opportunity. Thanks, Mohammed. This is a great opportunity for people to get engaged in the political process.
Thank you. The email address was just posted by Mohammed. Also, Tom has posted the website for Just Vision, which is the organization that produced the film. So, and you can watch the film for free on your device. Let's see. Not sure if there are more questions. Let me go to the Q&A. Sorry about this. Virgil asked, do you have a template of a letter or email to your legislator requesting a meeting with them regarding this issue?
I'm sorry, can you say that again? I was looking at the chat.
Virgil is asking if the community has a template of a letter or email that we can use to send to our legislator requesting a meeting with them regarding this issue.
Yes, we're still working on a lot of the training materials. We can develop a letter or an email that people can send to their elected official, but I want to make the point that at the individual level, it's probably actually more important to make the phone call. and we'll provide the talking points for that. You can send an email. I mean, everybody's used to getting emails, but I think that, time is of the essence, right? The legislature comes back into session in February. And so it just would skip a couple steps, I think, if people could get themselves prepared to make the phone call and then do that.
I know my experience with email is I get these stock responses and I don't even know if anybody sees it. So it's frustrating. Lucia says this presentation will be offered on Sunday, the 21st at Lucy Parsons Center, hosted by WHAM. Is this, Lucia, I'm not sure. Are you talking about this very presentation? Angel and Mohammed, are you presenting?
No, other people are taking the slide deck and they're going to present.
Okay, so someone else will be doing a similar presentation on Sunday, September 21st at 1 p.m. at the Lucy Parsons Center in Minneapolis, if anyone is interested. And I want to, I'll say at this point too, that all of you will be receiving the recording of this, and we encourage you to forward it to those people who were not able to attend today's event. I think this is one of the most important webinars we've had. Yeah, they're all important, of course, but this appeals directly to us here in Minnesota, and it gives us an opportunity to actually do something. I think all of us have felt very stilted and just unmoved because we're frozen. What can we do? What can we do? And this is something we can do. Let's see here. To what extent are legislators concerned about being criticized as being anti-Semitic? Is that a factor in gaining support? If so, how are you approaching addressing that?
I mean, I think it's going to be there if we're asking them to. That's a real issue. Both anti-Semitism is a real issue, and and conflating pro-Palestinianism with anti-Semitism. And I think just kind of with talking them through it. And I don't know. Angel, do you have anything to say on that?
Well, I think that last month's forum, Middle East Peace Now's forum, was focused on having hard conversations. And that is specifically around this issue. And I agree. It is we have to step into relationship with people and help them understand that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. And there's a lot of tools in that argument, including that the Jewish Voice for Peace, which is predominantly Jewish people, right, has been leading the charge in Minnesota and in the Twin Cities to, fight back against these anti-boycott laws. So there's like this famous saying in the like self-help movement, and it goes something like, we can do hard things. You can do hard things. I know, as I'm in a family that I married into a Jewish family. I have a lot of Jewish relatives, and I know that these can be that this is complicated. That's kind of where we land with that. It's complicated, but sort of you can hold that it's complicated. You can hold that right next to your right to boycott should not be taken away. It's, you can hold both of those ideas at the same time. And so I think that this is an opportunity for all of us to, develop our arguments. And frankly, I'm just going to say out loud, hope it's okay. The state of Israel is not helping itself. This continued genocide has activated and woken up a lot of people that are kind of like, what the heck is going on? Like, why, why? And so there's a lot of support for Palestinian individual families and communities. I know we do a lot of that up here in Duluth. And so I feel that we who work in, the social justice movements and work on the side of what is right, this is an opportunity for us to just step into, confronting that. Anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. And, we'll figure it out, and they'll figure it out too, eventually.
Well, and I would also like to add what Mohammed, you said much earlier in the presentation, that this isn't just about Palestinian issues. This whole anti-BDS legislation can stretch far. That's what the film Just Vision really focused on, was this can go spread into other legislative issues that have absolutely nothing to do with Israel and Palestine or anti-Semitism. So I think that's an angle that can be used when the term anti-Semitist, you're an anti-Semitist if you support this repeal. No, this isn't. It's not connected. It's not even connected.
Yeah.
So.
And when courts look at laws, so if another anti-boycott law was passed and it was challenged, a lot of times when court look at laws, they look at, well, what else is on the books? And it says, well, there's another one on the books, so it's clearly okay. So having one, even if it's unrelated to anything that you care about, is still a danger.
Yeah.
That's a great point, right?
Just a couple comments here in the chat, and I'll look at the Q&A too. Well, we do have more in the Q&A. They keep coming, folks. Actually, we do not have any more in the Q&A. There is a comment. There are two comments regarding anti-Semitism. Someone says that Senator Pappas, who supported the original bill, has kids who lives in the settlements. I believe she means the Israeli settlements, and she is leading the effort to repeal the bill now. So that's a turnaround. And another comment, there's a book that someone has cited, When They Speak Israel, a guide to clarify conversations about Israel. It's written by Alex McDonald. Tom, if everybody can see the chat, that's listed there. That is the extent of our questions, unless there's anything that I have missed. Tom, did I get everything there that you saw?
Think so.
Okay. Well, it's time to thank our guests, I should say, Mohammed and Angel. First of all, thank you for your diligent work in this and doing the lion's share of the work for us, the citizens of this great state. We are indebted to the entire BDS community. Thank you.